So hi, I'm here with Ed Thorpe, Ad Hoc Expert we've been working with on Digi-inclusion. We're here together in Brussels and we've been working on the Digi-inclusion Playbook today, trying to think about finalising the structure. So we'll just have a quick chat about where things are and give people a sense of how it's developing and what might be involved. So let's get into it.
Yeah, my name is Ed Thorpe. I've been working as an ad hoc expert with the Digi-inclusion network, and at the moment we're working towards the finalisation of the playbook. And this is designed to be a tool, a really practical tool that cities and urban stakeholders can use to try and really improve and change the way that they're addressing challenges around digital exclusion that people in their communities are facing.
From your perspective, we've been working on this together for quite a while. What's your kind of reflections on the process of putting it together and how it's evolved and how we've drawn in the different aspects and the meetings and things?
I think it's been an interesting process because what we've been trying to look at, I think originally, was how can you measure digital exclusion at a local level. And one of the things we learned was that it's very difficult to do that in a very precise way. It's not an exact science. Any attempts to put a precise number or percentage on what digital exclusion looks like doesn't have a lot of meaning. And so we need to address the nuance that exists. And we see that sometimes when we talk about digital exclusion, it's very easy to go into stereotypes. Typically we think about older people or people who maybe are living in isolated communities who may be excluded. But actually, digital exclusion can be much more subtle than that. It could be someone who appears to have access and to be included, but actually in reality is very limited in what they can use and what they can achieve in their digital use.
Yeah, and I guess that's where the whole thing with the wave of digitalization came from, and trying to represent these different things and find ways to illustrate that it's not just about the most excluded, but there are other people who suffer exclusions in different ways. What for you are like the really key things that are coming out of it in the playbook? What are the really key messages that are in there? What's the core stuff?
I think the wave of digitalization is a really useful image to try and understand the subtleties that I was talking about how to understand digital exclusion, because the wave is a kind of a spectrum. You can be anywhere along that wave. It's not just that you're excluded, you're included. You can be somewhere you can be precariously balanced on the wave, or you can be sliding backwards. Or maybe if you're developing your skills, you can be, increasing up the wave. And that wave also captures the fact that it's in constant movement. The digital world is continually changing.
Yeah, there's more waves coming potentially.
And people who weren't excluded 5 years ago might find themselves excluded. People maybe of my generation, we might find ourselves increasingly excluded if we're not able to keep up with changing technology. And the more that things digitalize, and local authorities have that challenge, the more they try and digitalize their services, the more risks they're creating of excluding some of their residents.
Yes, I bet that people might slide off the back of the wave, and actually whilst they're fine at the moment with the ones we have as I think digitally sort of surviving, they're okay, but actually as things evolve, if we don't think about that, we could end up with new exclusions happening, particularly as we digitize new things. Yeah.
And I think it's also important to distinguish the ways that people use digital tools, and the fact that somebody may be included digitally at a social or entertainment level. Maybe they're on the internet quite a lot, but for professional purposes, they're excluded. Maybe their skills aren't quite adequate to be able to really take advantage of opportunities in the digital economy.
Yeah, so it's that social versus economic aspects to it and those different things. And actually, I suppose one of the things we've seen in the network, and when we've looked at some of the things around the wave and the different personas we have, is that there are exclusions that happen at the upper end of the ability level as well, that people aren't getting best value because they don't know how to digitize their analog business and things like that. So there's those subtleties as well. And it doesn't have to be about people with multiple exclusions only. It can be about other things, and it is valid to sometimes focus on those people because they will become more excluded as time goes on if we don't support them in the right way.
And some of these are political choices, I think, that's one of the things that the playbook attempts to guide local authorities through. It's to challenge, to think, to reassess, okay, what are our priorities? Is it really just to focus on the most excluded? If we're going to invest a lot of resources in targeting the most excluded, what do we hope to achieve by that? And what could we achieve by focusing on people who are at some level included but have forms of exclusion? Maybe people with moderate skills, we could gain more by boosting their skills than we can by investing a lot in targeting people that really have no skills.
Yeah.
And maybe don't want or need to enter the digital world. Maybe that's not a key priority for them. So I'm not sure we should be forcing that upon them.
And we've seen a debate where people who are at the very far end of that spectrum often have multiple other exclusions as well. So they're often in extreme social deprivation, unemployment, mental health, and a lot of, or potentially, not always, but potentially a lot of other issues that compound it. And the digital side of it's not their first priority. So there's an element of like balancing when to intervene, when to support, where's the most effective point to do that, and where's the most impact. And it's kind of coming together slowly, and we've been working on it today and trying to think about how we make sense of it all. What are your thoughts around how practical this will be for cities, or what people will really get out of it? How do you think people would be best using it? Where do you really see the value of this sort of product?
I think one of the challenges that we've been facing putting together the playbook is trying to create something which can cater to very different starting points. Some local authorities might already have a clear strategy in place. Others are in a position where there's lots of initiatives happening in their city, but it's not part of a coherent strategy as such yet. And trying to design something which is going to be useful to those different groups has been quite challenging.
Like multiple entry points, we've talked about how do we make it useful for people who've got a bit of knowledge versus less knowledge versus actually quite advanced. How can everyone get something from it? Yeah.
And there's a certain amount, and one of the messages in the playbook is that you can start taking action immediately based on some quite common assumptions. There's quite a lot of research out there on which are the most at-risk groups, what kind of services and interventions work well to kind of boost their digital inclusion. So if cities want to, they can already start taking action on that basis. But it's also important to think, as much as possible, people should be refining their strategy and understanding better what digital exclusion looks like within their community. And we provide a series of tools, which none of them are obligatory, but which, when the time is right, if they have the resource, if they're ready to go to that level, they can improve their strategy, they can improve their targeting to understand what are the real needs of people in the community.
That needs base, because we're talking about exclusions and tackling exclusions, and actually that comes from a need of something that's missing or something that could be improved. And I think it's getting into how do we make sure we understand what those specific needs are, so we're not taking actions that aren't necessarily as focused as they could be.
There's a balance, I think, between building on what we know. So we know, for example, that age is a risk factor for exclusion, low income, unemployment, low educational attainment.
These are risk factors. It's not a given, but it's a risk factor in being potentially excluded. Yeah.
But if you're actually going to try and help someone to be more included, you need to really understand what for them is the barrier, what is their motivation. Is it as simple as saying we need to train them in skills, or before that, do you need to help work with them to help explain why they should even want to take part in the digital world?
Yeah.
Because if you don't understand that, you could spend a lot of money on services that have limited, or training programs that have limited uptake.
And I guess that's the whole point of a lot of this, is that you can spend a lot of money on things that might have some benefit, but if we can be better targeted, better focused, understand the local context better, then we can be really smart and efficient with the resources, and often limited resources that we have to deploy on these.
Always limited resources. And make use of the ecosystem of providers that might already be present in a city. And I think that's another key message, that local authorities don't need to be tackling this problem alone, and they can't tackle it alone. There are actors, out there, organisations, non-profits, even for-profits, that are providing services in this field, and trying to bring everyone together as part of a kind of a coherent offer, and making sure that you're identifying and addressing gaps that might exist in that offer. It could be that several organizations are providing services to target a group, older people, for example, and maybe nobody's offering something to another group. And again, having that, having a strategic approach requires an overview and an understanding of, okay, where is action happening? Where are the gaps? Where can we step in to address those gaps?
So I think we've got all these different plays that have been developed, and some are around data, some are around specific interventions or training or support, and some are also around that bit around building the strategy. Is there any particular aspect that for you is like, that's absolutely key? What's the absolute thing that just needs to happen to really make this sort of stuff work?
Yeah, I think we've been developing this idea that there are certain core plays that all cities should be using to try and make sure that there is a strategic approach. I think that's the reality is in many cases solutions, interventions have been developed piecemeal by different organizations. And so I think one of the first things that cities need to do is to revisit their objectives and their priorities in this field. They need to think about what are we trying to achieve, based on this nuanced understanding of maybe there are more subtle forms of exclusion than the ones we're typically used to thinking about, more nuanced than just the most extreme cases. And then can we map what's happening already? Can we look at, who are providing which services, and on that basis identify gaps? And I think some of those approaches to just make sure there is a coherent strategy is probably the essential starting point, which can then be refined by some of the other tools we're suggesting around improving the understanding of digital exclusion locally.